my research and investigation into the nature of reality. It's a journey of self-exploration which examines human consciousness and the way that our consciousness relates to the universal problems which we currently face as a species. It's an empowering exposition on the nature of spiritual awareness, self-healing, and freedom. So I build this presentation as an opportunity to expand our awareness, collectively arm ourselves with knowledge, and take part in a healing process that is currently underway on our planet. I'd like to say that the scope of this presentation is enormous in scale, and a very wide variety of what are seemingly unrelated topics are going to be covered. So each of these topics are kind of large enough in scope that they could be considered separate studies unto themselves. My intention here throughout this lecture series is not to cover each topic exhaustively, but rather to present an overall tapestry from which a larger picture may emerge in the minds of the audience. So this will require focused attention over a period of time, and will also require the use of your intuition to feel the information as is being presented and decide whether it resonates with you. Okay? This information should not be in any way confused with wide-eyed optimism or naivety. It has been amassed through years of painstaking research, and it is not simply thrown out there without any knowledge to back it up, and that knowledge is all available if you simply would do the research along the lines of the topics that are presented in the handout. Another thing I'd like to emphasize is that none of this information, I don't view it as my own ideas or beliefs. This is just information about the world that I've come to understand, and I'm just putting out there for other people's consideration. It isn't my personal belief system that I'm trying to pass off on to anybody. I think if I tried to do something like that, I would be no better than some of the people that I'll be talking about in later parts of the presentation that are really trying to negatively manipulate people. I'm trying to steer people away from belief in general and toward gnosis, or knowledge of a thing because they themselves have looked directly into it. That's the object here. So I'm not asking anybody to believe me. The last thing that I want is for people to leave here simply accepting or believing what I'm going to present here. I'm trying to encourage people to look into this material on their own to find out whether it is true. Okay, and that's generally the whole purpose. To encourage others to seek this knowledge, and I believe this is knowledge that can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves and our world. And I think that's how we better this place. Okay, so one other quick thing I'll mention: this presentation is actually available to anyone who wants to host it for other people to see. So you could be hosts of this presentation if the knowledge resonates with you and you'd like other people to also check it out. I'll give this talk anywhere for free. Okay. And lastly, for anybody that feels that you've gained something valuable from what you've seen and heard here today, please feel free to make a donation. You're under no obligation to do so, but so that my work can continue. The materials cost something to print, for ink and whatnot, and I need to maintain an internet connection to do further research. So if you feel you're capable, please give a donation if you've gained something from what you're going to hear today. Okay? So with that, I'll get started. Thank you. Okay. As you know, this presentation is called What on Earth is Happening? And I don't put a question mark on that because I'm not asking the question. This is my attempt to, in fact, answer that question. What is actually taking place on this planet at this time? These are the four gentlemen who I call the four horsemen of my personal apocalypse, so to speak. These are the people that were the most instrumental mentors in my personal awakening process. Respectfully, my entire presentation series is dedicated to the men whose shoulders I kind of stand upon. The gentleman up on the top left there is David Icke. On the top right, that's Michael Tessarian. On the bottom left, Jordan Maxwell. And on the bottom right, the late, great Terence McKenna. So respectfully, I dedicate this entire lecture series to these gentlemen. Part 1, Introduction, Truth and Lies, Questions and Answers. So what the entire presentation series is ultimately about is truth. And it's a difficult concept when you bring up this notion. Because one of the problems is that there are many people who actually do not think that there is such a thing as truth. And this leads into a very hairy area that you call moral relativism. Because if there is no truth, if there is no absolute moral absolute, you get into the notion that it's only what I think or what I believe about what is. See, my concept going forward with the notion of truth is that truth is that which has undergone the formality of actually occurring. That's what truth is. That's how Alfred North Whitehead, a very astute philosopher, put it. Truth is what is. It isn't what our perceptions of a thing are. Our perceptions can vary very wildly off from what is true, or they can resonate in harmony with what is true. So I'm not talking about people's perceptions of something. I'm talking about what is. Now, I'm not here to be the absolute standard of that. I'm not here to tell people totally what that is. Okay, I'm not here to express the mind of God to people, so to speak. Okay, the truth here that I'm talking about is what has been occurring and is occurring now on planet Earth, and that's knowable. We can know that. You can know that. It isn't an unknowable thing that's unattainable. That's what many people want us to think. But that isn't what's the truth. The truth is that the truth about what's going on here is knowable. And we can come to know it and understand it. So it's kind of like that's the first belief you have to have. And then all other beliefs after that fall away. You don't need to believe anything after that point. But that's the first, you kind of have to start out, to go down the path, you have to start out believing that there's something that it's leading up to. That there's something to acquire and to be obtained. And that is what the truth is. That's what the ultimate goal of this is all about. William Blake, poet and writer, said that truth can never be told so as to be understood and not be believed. So if you simply remove the negatives from this, what he's basically saying is that if you can tell the truth in a way that it can be understood by people, they will make the decision to recognize it as such. Okay? So if you can tell the truth in a way that it can be understood, it will be believed. And that's what I'm striking out to do here. Philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer made this statement about the stages that truth passes through. He said, every truth passes through 3 stages before it is recognized. In the first, it is ridiculed. In the second, it is opposed. And in the third, it is regarded as self-evident. Philosopher Georges Bataille said that the truth is paradoxical to the extent of being exactly contrary to the usual perception. So what he's saying here is, as people perceive the world, most people perceive the world, the usual way that they see the world is actually quite the opposite of what the truth is. And I resonate with that statement. George Orwell, author of the book 1984, about a totalitarian dictatorship that had taken over the world, said that during times of universal deceit, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act. And make no bones about it, make no mistakes about it. What you are ultimately going to hear throughout the course of this presentation, all 4 parts in fact, is an act of revolution. That is what it is. The questions that are going to be posed for the entire presentation, these are the questions I'm delving to in fact answer, to provide answers for throughout this whole series, is who are we? What is the purpose of human life? Why do we hold the beliefs that we do about ourselves and the world in which we live? Why do we act the way that we do toward ourselves and others, both individually and collectively? What is happening in our world today, and more importantly, why are these events playing out? Why is what is happening in the world happening? And how can we improve ourselves, and by doing so, improve the world in which we live? These are the greatest questions that humanity has ever asked of itself. This is what an examined life is about, asking these questions of ourselves. And these questions have answers. They do indeed have answers. The answers to these questions are discoverable and knowable. They are not eternal mysteries that can never be understood or known. the enemy of all truth, the thing that tries to stop people from actually getting at the truth and understanding it is lies and deception, which we'll go into, and this will be covered over and over again, the many ways that we are lied to and deceived. And in fact, the many ways we lie to ourselves and deceive ourselves. So if there's anybody that's associated with lies and deception, it's a man like this, Adolf Hitler. He said, make the lie big. Make it simple. Keep saying it, and eventually they will believe it. Does that sound kind of familiar?
Yes.
And he understood that people will resonate more with a big lie, something about the big questions in life than they will about the nuances of the little parts of things in life. So make the lie big. Make it simple, because he understands truth is simple. So if you're going to combat the truth, you're going to combat it with a lie. You also want to make the lie simple. Keep repeating it. Make it repetitious. It gets it into the subconscious, and it gets it accepted that way. If anybody knew more about lying than Adolf Hitler did, it's this man, Paul Goebbels, who was the minister of propaganda during the Third Reich. He said, the bigger the lie, the more it will be believed. Quite the opposite of what people think. You'll get away with a small lie. In fact, the larger the lie, the more all-encompassing the lie, the greater a likelihood it has of being believed by the mass of people. And that brings us to my concept that I call the biggest lie. The biggest lie of all is simply, there is no truth. That's the number one lie. Most people will stop there, because many people in our culture, in our society, in fact throughout the world, believe that there is no such thing as truth. That it is just perception, and that's all that there is. And everybody has their own individual truth that they can, basically accept and live their life accordingly, and everything will be okay. But that isn't what the truth is. There is such a thing as truth, and you can come to know it. So can everyone else. And the next part of the biggest lie is that there's no truth to discover, so why bother even setting off on a journey to understand truth? If you can get people to believe that there's no truth out there, that there's nothing to be acquired, then they'll just accept the way things are. Never attempt to change anything for the better, and just go on with their life leading an unexamined existence. Okay? There is a truth, it can be known, and there's nothing that I can do to get anybody past the biggest lie. That's something that has to be done internally. You have to make that first leap of faith, and then from there, no more faith is required. That's it. That's the only place in my presentation where I tell anyone that any level of faith is required. You have to have the faith that there is such a thing as truth, and that you can come to understand it if you work hard enough. So where do we go for answers in the quest for the truth? Where do most people go to find answers to their questions that they have in life? Well, these are the big four places that most people look to for answers to their questions about life. Political scenes, religions, science, and increasingly what has come to be called the New Age movement. And in my series, in my presentation, in the work that I present, I look at these four areas of inquiry as institutionalized belief systems. These are boxes for consciousness. They are controlled paradigms, controlled ways of looking at the world, ways of looking at human life. So they're too small to encompass the truth. They're too small. They're too limited of a worldview. So if you're going to look for the truth in any one of these particular areas or boxes, you're going to come to be sorely disappointed, because the truth is too large to be contained or encompassed in a box. And when you come to the edge of one of these boxes, let's use science as an example. I'm not telling people throw science out the window. I'm saying if science encounters something that is not within its paradigm, it wants to throw it out. It rejects it because it can't explain it. And if that's your attitude about things, you encounter something that you can't explain, you become fearful of it, you throw it out, and then you're off the path of truth. People who are looking into truth have to be willing to go wherever the truth leads you, no matter how dark that place may seem. Okay? Keep that in mind. Those boxes for consciousness are just that. They're there to limit us in our understanding of the truth, to dissuade people from going outside the box. If we're going to understand what the real truth that's going on here is, we need to think outside the box. So part one, the solution. My presentation is broken into 3 parts. Part 2 is very large, so I've actually broken that into 2 subsections. So in the 4 months that I'll be here lecturing, I'm giving part 1 this evening. Next month will be part 2A, following month part 2B, and then the month after that part 3. Okay, so it'll be given in 4 sections. So it's basically 3 parts. I start with the solution first. Okay, so we're not going to look at the problem first. That'll start next month. I start my presentation with the solution. So I'm presenting what the solution to the problem is before anything else. And this is the solution to the entire problem that we face as a species. Consciousness is the solution. Consciousness must emerge, must flower, must blossom on a global scale if we're going to get out of the mess that we're in. And for it to do that, for it to blossom on a global scale, the only way that really occurs is when it blossoms on an individual scale. So you have to be the change that you want to see for it to happen out there. You have to raise your own consciousness, your own vibration, your own awareness, so that it then trickles out to the external world. And by doing so, by you changing your consciousness, it affects others. So this is what we're going to talk about throughout all 4 parts of the presentation. What consciousness is, how it works, how it can be manipulated, how it can be raised or lowered, etc. So I want to start with a quote that is found on the Oracle of Delphi. Heed these words, you who wish to probe the depths of nature. If you do not find within yourself that which you seek, neither will you find it outside. If you ignore the wonders of your own house, how do you expect to find other wonders? In you is hidden the treasure of treasures. Know thyself, and you will know the universe and the gods. All knowledge is ultimately self-knowledge. That's what this is saying. If we know not ourselves, you know nothing. This is what all knowledge that is worth having ultimately is about. It is about who we are. It's about ourself. It's about how our own consciousness works and functions. And this is why we're encountering so many problems in the world. So few people have this knowledge. And some of us have become repositories for this knowledge. I know there's some in this room here today that are repositories for this knowledge. And once we have that, it's our obligation and our duty to bring that information and awareness, put it out there for others. So we need a definition for consciousness. So if we go to a dictionary, here's a simple definition of what consciousness is. So most people think, well, I have consciousness, I'm awake, physically awake. Consciousness means more than that. This is a dictionary definition. The characteristics of a being generally regarded to comprise qualities such as subjectivity, self-awareness, sentience, sapience, and the ability to perceive the relationship between oneself and one's environment. Now, I think that's an excellent definition for consciousness, but it's a little overly complex. Okay? We could spend time breaking down each individual word and defining it, but I think I want to present a simpler definition for consciousness that I want to use going forward throughout the presentation. And that's this. Consciousness is quite simply the ability of a being to recognize patterns and meaning with respect to events taking place, both within oneself and in the realm in which the self exists and operates. So consciousness is simply your ability to recognize and understand what's going on within yourself and around yourself. It's that simple. That's what consciousness really is, ultimately. the ancients had some models for consciousness. I'll be talking a lot about ancient wisdom throughout the series, because it's a fallacy that the ancients did not have more understanding about ourselves. You know, we have kind of fallen in our understanding of ourselves from where the ancients were. They were more connected with consciousness. They were more connected with an understanding of their psyche and their subconscious. So they had a model of consciousness known as the Tao. This is famous in Taoist belief systems. They looked at the all, the circle, you know, the symbol of the divine, of God, the circle. It's perfect. It's unbroken. It has no beginning and no end. They divided it into two colors with a serpentine shape or an S shape. And one's a light half, one's a dark half, and there's a seed of the opposite in each one, representing that there's a dance of polarities. And no matter how deeply you go into one polarity, always there is the seed of the opposite polarity carried within it. So this is known as the Tao, and the energies of polarity within the all were known as the yin and yang. So the yang is the light part of the energy. It's solar in nature, representing the sun. It has a masculine, active quality to it. It's more analytical, dominant, left-brained, and aggressive than yin energy. So these are qualities we associate with the day, with the sun, with masculine. Yin energy is the darker energy. It's lunar or associated with the moon. It's feminine in nature. It's more passive, intuitive, submissive, right-brained, and compassionate. Okay, so these qualities are, neither of them are positive or negative to be looked at as we should strive to be all one way or all the other. A well-rounded person in consciousness is a perfect blend of all of these energies put together. It's about balance. It's about coming to balance and having a perfect blend of both yang, or masculine energies, and yin, or feminine energies, within each individual, whether they are male or female. So we can't look at this as being about male versus female. It's masculine and feminine, and they are all part of every individual, whether they are man or woman. Another model that the ancients had for consciousness is an equilateral triangle. This is called the law of three. They recognize that there's a threefold aspect to human consciousness. And these are the three ways that we can really ever express ourselves to anyone. The three ways that you can make yourself known in the world, that you express yourself in physical reality to others, okay? And to yourself. So can anyone guess what these three modes of consciousness are? Anybody have any ideas? How can you express your consciousness? Emotion. Now that's excellent, because most people will think of that last. And that's the most important one as far as I'm concerned. Okay? So emotion, great, that's one. Anybody else?
Body.
What do you do with your body?
I don't know.
Action.
Action. That's another one. And the third? Or
Mind, visualization.
mind. What takes place in your mind?
Thoughts.
Thoughts. Thoughts, emotions, and actions. This is the law of three, the trifold aspect of consciousness. Okay? These are the three ways that we make ourselves known to anyone and ourselves. Our thoughts are the essence or the creator of our experience. Our emotions are the yin aspect. It's the internal, sacred, feminine aspect of consciousness. Okay, so you feel something within. You have a thought, you have an emotion about it, you feel something inside the body. It's internal, it's passive. Okay? Then, based on these two, you then take action in the world. Our actions are based on our thoughts and our emotions, ultimately. So that's the male principle, doing something with your thoughts and your emotions. That's the yang aspect of consciousness. And, the thoughts are where they arise, the creator. the emotions, the sacred feminine, and then the actions, the child of the thought and actions. So you have a trinity. Okay? And we call these mind, body, and spirit. You know, your mind is where your thoughts take place. This could be the creator God of the Trinity when we look at it symbolically. Okay? It's the father part, the essence that happens in the mind. The emotions. This is the spirit in which we do things, the Holy Spirit. It's the sacred feminine. It's internal. Okay? And then the male son, the male byproduct of your thoughts and your actions, or the divine child, you know, of your thoughts and your emotions, the divine child is your actions. So the ancients recognized this trinity, and this is the model that they used to explain the threefold or the triune aspect of consciousness. Now, correlating with this, there is a triune aspect to the physiology that's within us that goes along with the triune aspect of our consciousness. And this is called the triune brain. Most people don't know about or understand the structure of the human brain and how it works. And it's to our great detriment that most of us do not. We're to understand the events that are playing out in the world. We really have to understand the structure of the human brain and how it works. So there are actually three complexes that make up the whole brain system. There's the brain stem and cerebellum. Here's the brain stem right here. This dark area here is known as the cerebellum. These two parts together are called the R complex of the brain. It stands for the reptile complex. Okay, because this part of the brain is kind of responsible for our reptilian aspects or tendencies. We're like a threefold being in one. A reptile, a mammal, and a human, all in one, all operating together. The reptile brain is in all of us, and it's responsible for the fight or flight response. So if you're attacked, right, maybe by a predator, let's say, you have to make a decision. Are you going to fight it or are you going to run? So you're operating pretty much from the R complex. Physiological things happen when you go into that mode. This is also known as stress, the fight or flight response. You have to make a decision about whether you're going to fight or run away. So blood gets pumped away from the higher parts of the brain. It gets pumped out of the torso also. It goes into the extremities, because if you're going to fight, you need your arms. If you're going to run, you need your legs to have more blood flow and hardness in them. Okay, so this is responsible for a lot of the reason why people have the diseases that they acquire, because they're in stress or they're existing in the R complex most of their lives, most of their time. And then the blood flow goes out of the torso where the internal organs are, and they develop any number of diseases. You also can't really think very well in that state. If you're being attacked, the object isn't to start doing higher order thinking. It's to survive. That's what this part of the brain is all about, survival. Survival, physical things, dealing with the physical, hard world, okay? And it gets into areas when it becomes chronically lived in as stress, greed, power, control, things like that. Hoarding, okay? The second brain that's above the R complex, okay? It's above it symbolically, it's above it physiologically, okay? It's above it in consciousness. It's a higher order of consciousness part of the brain. It's called the limbic system, the limbic brain. It's composed of the hypothalamus, the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the pituitary and pineal glands. Okay, this is known as the mammal brain. This part of the brain, it sits over top of the R complex. It's in the middle of our head, and it's basically responsible for all of the chemicals that comprise our emotions, that enable us to feel something in the body when we have a thought or we take an action. Okay? So this is our emotional part of our brain. It's in the middle of the head. It's been called the middle chamber in some occult, esoteric ideologies. Okay? So without the mammal brain, you couldn't really experience emotions. This is why a snake doesn't really feel emotions. It's a creature of instinct. Most reptiles are. They're creatures of pure instinct. Instinctual responses, stimulus response. A snake isn't going to get sad or depressed, but your dog can, because they have a higher order limbic brain. Okay? They're not operating just on the reptile complex. Now, humans are unique because they have a neocortex that is larger and more developed than any of the other species on this planet. The top part of the brain, over top of the limbic brain, is known as the neocortex. Okay, this is responsible for all higher order functions, higher order brain functions. This is the part of the brain that really makes us human. Okay, without it, we couldn't have speech. Without it, we couldn't have art. There would be no music without this part of the brain. Okay? The things that really differentiate us from animals. You wouldn't have science or mathematics, anything like that. Now, it's interesting to see how these parts of the brain really are also symbolic corollaries to the Trinity. Okay? You have the Father God, okay? The Old Testament law-obsessed God, the controller, who when things don't go the way he wants them to go, wants more control. So this is the R complex, the base brain. Base consciousness associated with control really comes out of the R complex, or the reptilian brain, the base brain. It's the lowest part of the brain. You have the sacred feminine, the Holy Spirit, where emotions come from physiologically, is the center part, internal. Okay? The internalization are emotions, the sacred feminine. This is the limbic brain, the middle chamber. Okay? And then the Savior, the light of the world, higher order brain function that ultimately gives rise to an enlightened state of awareness, the neocortex. That's what makes that possible. Higher order thinking, particularly this part of the brain, known as the frontal neocortex. So right behind the forehead, the prefrontal neocortex is the most densely memory-containing and densely electrochemical connective tissue in the known universe. Okay? It's the most advanced computer that we know about. And it sits right behind this bone, right behind the forehead. The ancients called this the third eye. They knew where the seat of higher order function within the physiology was. They knew that that is the physiological connector to higher orders of consciousness. And they labeled it as such. They called it the third eye. And we know today that's where the highest order thought takes place, in the prefrontal neocortex. Now, another aspect of the neocortex that's important to understand is that it's bilaterally symmetrical. And this is going to come up over and over again. Okay? There is a left brain hemisphere and a right brain hemisphere. If you look at the brain, if you took a brain out of the head and you looked at it, it's actually in two complete halves. It's only connected by a fibrous network called the corpus callosum. Okay? But essentially, it's two hemispheres, completely separate. Okay? The left hemisphere provides for the functions of analytical thought, logic, language, mathematics, science, critical thinking, things like that. Okay? The right hemisphere, so that's the masculine aspects of thinking. Okay? The right hemisphere contains the more feminine aspect of thinking. Okay? It's holistic thought, intuition, creativity, art, music, things like that. So I'm going to associate the left and the right brain hemispheres of the neocortex. Remember, we're talking now just about the higher brain, the human brain, the neocortex. I'm going to associate the yang energy with the left brain, and with the right brain, the yin energy that we already talked about. Okay? And I'm going to ascribe symbols to these, and these are going to come up over and over again. Okay? The yang look at that as the male aspect of the brain. Okay? The symbol that the ancients gave the male quality was an upward pointing triangle. They called this the blade, because it's like the tip of a spear, or it's a rudimentary phallic symbol as well. And these are thrusting mechanisms. They're active principles. Okay? Now the opposite of that is the yin energy, the feminine energy, the lunar energy, and this is represented by an upside down equilateral triangle. And the ancients called this the chalice, or the cup. Okay? So it's the shape of a feminine womb. This is the shape of the lower portion of a female's body. Okay? It's the holy grail, so to speak. The cup that holds the blood. The cup that holds menstrual blood, from which, birth is given. So that's the blade, that's the chalice. We'll talk about these two symbols and how they relate more when we get into symbology. But we have to understand that the left hemisphere of the brain is our masculine qualities, largely, the masculine qualities of our thought, and the right brain is the feminine qualities of our thought. So the next concept I'm going to introduce is polarity. What we're really talking about here is perceived opposites. And I say perceived opposites because when you really delve into polarity, you really understand, you begin to understand, that the opposites that I'm really talking about here are really all shades of one thing. So I'll give a few examples. A polarity that we see in the world is light and dark. Okay? Perceived opposites. Why perceived? Because you can go into a dark room with a flashlight and illuminate the room, or with a candle and illuminate the room. But can you go into a well-lit room with a darkness flashlight or a darkness candle? There's no such thing. You can't shine darkness into a room. There ultimately is only light energy, or its absence. That's what you're really measuring. Okay, so polarity is a perception. It's not that there's actually two things warring against each other. Look at hot and cold. Hot and cold is the same thing. Okay? They're just measures of how much heat energy is present. There's only heat energy. If that heat energy isn't present, we call it cold. You can do this basically with any perceived polarity. So keep that in mind, that while we're looking at these as opposites, they're really perceived opposites. Okay? Now, the two polarities that I'm going to introduce are the emotional polarities. These are the good feeling and the bad feeling. Ultimately, every feeling that we experience are really only extensions of these two essences of emotion. Okay? So there is the good quality of emotion and the bad essence of emotion. Okay? One makes you feel good and alive. The other makes you feel bad and, just down and oppressed, etc. Okay? So this is a water crystal, a simple water molecule that is placed under high magnification in the presence of the first emotional polarity. Okay? A scientist named, interestingly, his name is Emoto, like emotion. This scientist who has a great book out called The Hidden Messages in Water, Masaru Emoto, I believe his name is. He does these experiments with water crystals. He'll expose regular water to a vibration in consciousness. He'll place it in a room with, let's say, a yogic healer or a Buddhist monk or something like that, a person of a high level of consciousness that might be a trained meditator or somebody that's really emanating a lot of higher vibratory energy. And then he'll take the water molecule and then place it under a microscope, and he'll look at whether there's been any organization to the molecular structure. And in the presence of this high level of consciousness, it orders in a beautiful crystalline shape like that. Order came out of it when exposed to this polar energy. Who can name the energy? The energy of the highest order of consciousness, the energy, the good feeling, basically.
Love.
Love. It's simple. Most people get that immediately. because we intuitively understand that that's what it is. Okay? The energy he exposed that water to was love. And then it orders. Order is created as a result. Okay? Now the opposite emotional polarity, the opposite essence of this good emotional polarity, this is what happened when he exposed the same water to this vibratory energy. The same water crystals. Under the microscope, chaos resulted. Total breakdown of order in the system. Okay? This is critical to keep in mind. That one created an incredible, ordered, crystalline, snowflake-type pattern. When he exposed it to the opposite energy under controlled conditions, okay, this is the pattern that resulted. Total chaos. A complete breakdown of the order within the system. Now, most people will give a different word that I'm looking for to describe this negative emotional polarity. Who can guess it?
Fear? Anger?
Fear. It's fear. Fear is the opposite polar emotion from love. Most people will say hate, anger, things like that, and it's a great answer, but they all stem from this. This is the essence that those, seemingly more negative expressions come from. They come from fear. Okay, so that is the negative emotional polarity. Now, each one of these emotional polarities, love and fear, right, they each have an internalized expression, right, an expression that happens within us only. And they each have an externalized expression that we see blossom in the external world. Okay? So we're going to go over both of those. So we flip it back and we say here's the love essence. Now take this to the highest order within. Okay? And I'll accept a few answers for this one because the actual word that I use to describe this concept isn't something that many people may break out with as a term. Okay? But there's a few answers for this. What is the internalized expression, okay, of the essence of love as we experience it internally, within ourselves, not in the outside world, but just within? When we are in the state of, let's say, self-love, okay, true self-love, what is that called? How does it reach its full manifestation within us? Who can name that state?
Bliss.
Happiness, joy, harmony. Harmony is a great word for it, okay? So harmony, balance, I would use, right? This is living in harmony with truth is really what this concept is, okay? And anybody else have any other words that they would call? Bliss, okay? Enlightenment. I call this dominion, okay? This is my word for it because dominion means that the individual within their own consciousness has attained rulership of self. Okay? They are sovereign. They own themselves. No one else can take over their own house, in other words. Okay? They cannot be controlled. They cannot be have their consciousness used for a purpose that they don't wish it to be used for. More importantly, the law of three is unified as one within one who is in dominion. As you think, so you feel, so you act. And all three of those principles are unified as one. And you cannot be torn apart. You cannot be divided from within. That's the state of dominion. And that is love reaching its full expression within an individual. Now, when fear reaches its expression within an individual, what is that state? Can anybody give some words that they might think of? When the polarity of fear has gone haywire within an individual, what results? Chaos. That's a great word for it, and that's real close to what I'm getting at. When you're in chaos emotionally, what are you called? What will people call you?
Confused.
There it is. Thank you. Confusion. Excellent. Because most people won't get that one. Confusion is ultimately the state of fear that has run haywire within an individual. So that's the internalized expression of the negative polarity. Now let's look at the externalized expression. And by the way, when you're confused, when you're in a state of chaos within, you can be controlled. You can be made to do things in opposition with what you know to be right. So that's what that state is all about, to get people confused. Now if we go back to the love vibratory energy, we're going to look at the next two parts are how these things manifest outwardly. What states result? What conditions result? Once these things are going on within us, when they result into the outside world. When love reaches its expression in the outside world, this is the state that results. Anyone?
Peace.
That's the first word that always comes back from the crowd. Peace. And yes, it is the state of peace. Okay? However, you will not have peace without this condition being present. This condition is the bringer of peace. Just like, for hatred to exist and for, death to come into the world through us, that comes through fear, through the expression of fear. Well, peace isn't going to come into the world except through this outward expression.
Compassion?
Outward. Remember, we're talking about outward. This is
Justice?
an external state. Peace, justice, what are these built upon?
Understanding?
What are these all built upon? You can't have any of these things.
God's laws?
Natural law.
Natural
Law. That's very critical. But the word I'm looking for, which is the most important word of this whole presentation, which is what it's all about, and it's about very little else. Freedom. Freedom is the state that results when love is present and flowers into the outside world, and the chains of bondage are broken. That is what it is all about. This is what the whole spiritual journey is all about. Freedom. And I say this in every one of my lectures in part one, and I'm going to continue to say it. Any teacher who claims to be a spiritual teacher and does not speak of freedom in these terms, does not speak of the highest spiritual goal as freedom, is a fraud, is a fraudulent spiritual teacher. Okay? It's quite simply. I can't make it more clear than that. Okay? This concept, freedom, is this one and the same with the quest for the divine. The quest for the divine and the quest for freedom are one. And I will take exception to any spiritual teacher that does not recognize that concept. Now, the opposite energy, when it comes to an expression, okay, fear. When we're in fear, we're internally confused. We're torn amongst ourselves. We're in a state of opposition with the self, right? What happens in the external world? Well, when you're in fear and you're confused and you don't know what's going on around you, one of the first things people want to try to do is this.
Control?
There it is.
Control?
Control is fear manifesting into the world and reaching its highest expression in the outside world. That's what control is. Control is based on fear. Okay? Freedom is based on love. We saw what the water crystals do when they are under the influence of these two modes of consciousness. The water crystal under the consciousness of love ordered. The water crystal under the consciousness of fear broke down into chaos. Anyone that thinks that you can ever create order through control is simply ignorant of the laws of nature. It simply does not work that way. You can only ever create anything that is ordered through freedom, which is based upon the dynamic energy of love. Okay? Direction. What is direction? How do we know whether we're going in the right direction on the journey? How do we know? Well, we have to ask ourselves some honest questions. Are we moving toward an expression of love, or are we moving toward an expression of fear? Honestly. What do we see playing out in the world? based on available knowledge of ourselves and the world in which we live, we have to make an honest appraisal of where we are and where we are headed if we want to change the course that we're on. An understanding of our past can help us to orient our direction for the future. And this is because the past is that which has undergone the formality of actually occurring. The truth. The future is unwritten. The truth is in the past and the present moment. Okay? And that's why if we are ignorant of history, yes, we are indeed doomed to repeat it. Okay? And our emotions are our compass for moral direction in life. This is the most important part of the concept of direction. If you numb out your emotions, the sacred feminine quality, the internalized expression of consciousness, okay, we're sailing without a compass. Okay? Sailing the ocean of consciousness with no compass, because our emotions are the compass itself. Worldview is the next concept that I'd like to present. And it's exactly what the word says. Worldview is simply how we as an individual view ourselves in the world and how we view the world at large and everyone else in it. So, just like the polarities, there's a positive and a negative worldview. A positive worldview sees, you may see yourself as that individual drop, okay? But you also recognize that you are made of the same thing that the whole ocean of consciousness is, that you are connected to it, that when you are in it, it is a total tapestry, a connected tapestry of oneness. Okay, where does the drop end and the ocean begin? There is no such thing when it's in the ocean. Okay, it's all one thing. Okay? See, it doesn't mean you can't still see yourself as a unique expression, like a snowflake, because every one of those drops is a unique expression that forms the whole. But it's also about understanding that we are connected. We are connected at higher levels, okay? That we are part of a living system, that we cannot separate ourselves. We're inextricably connected to one whole living system. In other words, there's really only one consciousness here. Human nature is a part of worldview. How we view basic human nature. And most people, when it comes to this concept, have an extraordinarily poisoned worldview. Because we don't look at human nature as, most of us do not look at human nature as fundamentally good. That's what human nature is. Human nature is fundamentally good. We come into the world, we basically come in at a fundamentally good nature. It is through conditioning. It is through control. It is through fear that harmful human qualities creep into an individual. And it's because we're bombarded with these things from the moment we're born into the world. Okay? That's what human nature really looks like. Are we really working toward true freedom? Do we even understand it as an individual? Do we understand what freedom and sovereignty is? And if we do, are we really working toward it? Are we putting these ideas out? Are we helping to properly educate other people about these things and why they're the most important thing that we should really be concerned with? Well, when we take this fundamental attitude about the world, when this is our worldview, these are the states that develop within an individual. An individual becomes empowered, enlightened, in better health, in better energy. And all possibilities begin to open up for them. That's the positive worldview. The negative worldview is the exact opposite. Okay? This looks at that little drop as, poor me. I'm powerless. Okay? I am separate from everything else. I need to try to take as much as I can, to control as much as I can. I'm not connected with that wider ocean of consciousness. I'm just a little powerless individual, okay? Separate from it all. I'm just a number in the field, okay? I'm not unique. I'm not special. Just a number. I'm born into the world flawed. Original sin. Completely flawed. Human nature is evil by its design, by its origin. Okay? You spend your life in a state like that, really, you're in a hypnotized condition. And you're vulnerable to all the conditioning that goes on around us that we very rarely perceive, many of us. Okay? And then you become internally confused and you want more and more control. Control. Okay? You lack a sense of power within, so you're looking for control without. That's what a fear-based consciousness is all about. When we take this kind of a worldview, these are the states that we fall into. Fear, oppression, domination of others, being internally dominated ourselves, torn apart. You know, we're made to do things that are immoral, that are against our better, higher judgment. You know? The next concept, magic versus sorcery. Now, some people will hear these terms and they'll think, well, this is all about, you know, some kind of Hollywood things, talking about magic, fantasy. Well, yeah, I have some Hollywood images here, and they're similar because we're going to see how similar these things actually are. Okay, but these are very real forces at work in the world that many people don't understand how they work. But they're all around us at all times, always having an effect, always having an influence. And they're very similar to each other. Very similar, as we will see. I put these two here to be deliberately similar. You know, for those who know the movie, you'll know which is which. But magic's definition: the science and art of influencing change, a word we hear a lot nowadays, to occur in accordance with the will. Now, that's exactly what it is. It's a science. There's a methodology to it. Okay, it's not just random things. Magic is a science. Okay, it's an art of influencing change to occur, and the change that is being influenced is in accordance with the will. Capital W. This is an extremely important concept. Capital W, will. Now, I can't go off into a whole explanation of what that word is, because whole volumes have been written on what capital W will is. Okay? It's an esoteric or occult concept that basically means divine will. The goal of what is attempting to be accomplished through consciousness. Okay? The evolution of consciousness to higher states of awareness. Okay? You could call it the will of God. You can call it the divine will, if you want. What God is trying to accomplish, if you're comfortable with that word. You know, you could call it the unfolding of the unified field, if you're more comfortable with scientific terms. Okay? Call it what you like. But the will is not the egoic or personal will of the practitioner. That's the idea that you should keep in mind. It's not my will be done, thy will be done. Okay? That's what that word is. Magic has a goal. Its goal that it is trying to accomplish on earth is non-dualism, or the creation of oneness. But oneness in a certain way. Oneness meaning oneness within. Creating or helping to create an individual that is complete in the sense that as they think, so they feel, so they act. And they cannot be torn apart. So they're non-dual within. Okay? They don't have a dual nature. And they don't say, well, I may think this way, yet I'm going to do this, even though I know that I don't really agree with this. I'm going to do it for this reason. Okay? Maybe it's money, maybe it's comfort, maybe it's not wanting to suffer in a certain way. But I'm going to take action that I ultimately know that I disagree with, or that I know to be wrong, anyway. That's dualism. Okay? That's dualism within. That's the state of opposition within. Magic's goal is to help the individual become non-dual. Okay? And the process that magic works through to create this state is called alchemy. Now, alchemy is very misunderstood in the modern day because people think it's about physical transmutation of metals. You know, taking a base metal like tin or lead and turning it into physical gold. This is just an allegorical metaphor for what alchemy is. Alchemy is about helping to raise consciousness to higher levels, to start with the lead consciousness and to help turn it into the solar consciousness, or the consciousness of gold. Okay? So when we're talking about alchemists and we're talking about them working with metals, they're working with states of consciousness. That's what it's really about. This is the difference between the words exoteric, which is like a cover story for something, and esoteric, which is the meaning that an initiate actually understands, because they've been initiated into the jargon and things like that. So that's what true esoteric alchemy is about, and it's the vehicle through which magic works. Now, sorcery's definition, as we'll see, is almost identical to the definition I gave for magic. Sorcery is the art, the science and art of influencing change to occur in accordance with the will. So people might say, well, that's the exact definition you gave for magic. No, it's not. It's exactly the opposite definition that I gave for magic, because one thing is changed, and that's that capital W. Now it's a lowercase w, and it takes on an entirely different connotative meaning. This isn't the divine will. This isn't the will of higher expressions of consciousness. This is my will be done. Okay? My egoic will, my desires. It doesn't matter what anybody else wants. If it makes me comfortable, if it benefits me, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to try to influence everybody else to do the same thing. That's what sorcery is. Sorcery's goal is opposition, and more importantly, it's opposition within. It's trying to make people not only fighting on the outside, but torn apart on the inside. That's what a sorcerer's goal is. It's to get you into a frame of mind, into a frame of consciousness that you will say, yes, I will take this action even though I may know it to be wrong, or feel that it is wrong. I'll numb out my emotions and I'll do it anyway. This is the state of internal opposition. Okay? That's sorcery's goal. It's to make you in opposition with yourself, with the three aspects of your own consciousness, so you are not united with the self, okay, in thought, emotion, and action. Sorcery's vehicle, like magic's vehicle was alchemy, is the arts of illusion and manipulation. And it's very simple. It's getting people to do two things. Believe that which is not true, and refuse to believe that which is true. That's it. It's that simple. These are the two ways that humanity suffers. We believe that which is untrue, which is not in harmony with natural law, and we refuse to accept that which is true and is in harmony with natural law. Period. That's it. That's why we suffer. And that's what the goal of the sorcerer is. Okay? Illusion and manipulation. The next section, barriers to self-realization. Okay? Now, look at the word realization. We'll be talking a lot about the meaning of words and how words are structured. See, it's about seeing with the real eyes. Realize. When you realize something, you're making it real, but you're also using the real eyes to see it. You're seeing something which you may not have been able to see before. Okay? So to get past that wall, to get to the true self, to get to the truth, these are what holds us back. These are the fear-based ideologies that hold us back from true self-realization, the recognition of who we really are. Okay? And there's four of them. The five-sense illusion, ego identification, the prison of a left brain, and institutionalized belief systems. Right? So we're going to take them one at a time. The first barrier that holds us back from the realization of our true selves is what is called the five-sense illusion. Okay? And it's very simply this. It's the belief that the only thing that exists, the only things which exist in manifested reality, are that which we, as human creatures, are able to perceive with our five sensory organs. Okay? So sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, and nothing else exists. Okay? And you realize how completely erroneous this view of reality is, because when you realize that what we have are organs that are just attenuated to certain frequencies. That's it. Your eyes see particular frequencies of light. Does that mean that there are no other frequencies of light? No, that's ridiculous. There's an infinity of light on both sides of the visible spectrum, as you can see here. You know, light rays go off in that direction, they go off in this direction. It doesn't mean that they're not there. And a great example is sound, okay? If I take a dog whistle into this room, and I blow the dog whistle with all my might, nobody in this room is going to hear that dog whistle. Does that mean that the sound isn't really reaching your ears? That sound waves aren't leaving the dog whistle, striking your eardrum anyway? Of course they are. Because if there was a dog in here, they would be freaking out. Okay? But because our sense receptors are not able to pick up those frequencies, we would say, I didn't hear anything. That does not mean there isn't sound there. See, we get identified with the senses because anything that's outside the senses, we can't pick up. It doesn't mean that there isn't an infinity of expressions outside of our physical senses that are real. Okay? Matter. Identification with matter as solid. And nothing could be farther from the truth view. This is the concept of what's now called old science. Okay? People still are clinging onto, a lot of people in the modern world are clinging onto Newtonian-based science and old models of the atom that have long since completely been disproven. And you know, nothing is less solid than an atom. Scientists are understanding that there's no solidity to an atom if you look into quantum mechanics. Okay? So matter is made of largely empty space. And even the things like the subatomic particles that they once were thinking there was some solidity to, they're even understanding now that these are simply vibratory pieces of energy. And at a quantum scale, it basically breaks down and there is no matter. You know? This is some sort of a construct for us to have experiences in as spiritual beings. But because we identify with matter as solid, we lose sight of that. So everything is made of these particles that are essentially just strands of vibrating energy. This is known as superstring theory. Everything from us, from every cell in our body, all the way up to galaxies. A great a video to check out, if you're on the web, is known as the quantum double slit experiment. And this brilliantly illustrates how matter is completely connected with consciousness, and it is actually not really solid as such, as we understand solidity to be. I'll try to briefly explain this experiment if you could follow me. Hopefully the science won't get too technical, okay? So, scientists take a double slit, let's say in a plate, okay? And they fire electrons. They first fire small bits of matter at it. Let's say like a BB gun, right? And you're going to measure on the outside wall, a wall, you know, separated from that plate at a distance, where the strikes are, okay, of the small balls of matter. Let's look at them as BBs, right? You shoot BBs through these two slits, they form this pattern on the wall behind the slits. Everybody follow that? Okay? So you should see two individual slit patterns when you fire matter through two slits. That sounds quite logical. Okay? When they fire small, very small bits of matter, called electrons, through these two slits, curiously, they do not get the pattern that they get with the larger pieces of matter. They get a pattern that looks like a wave pattern, called an interference pattern. So a pattern like this would emerge if you sent waves of water through these two slits, because the crests and the troughs of the wave are going to interfere with each other, and they're going to create this interference pattern. So scientists are confused about this. Well, we got this with large matter, we get this with small matter. Why? Well, they think maybe the stream of electrons that they're firing at these two slits, maybe all the little bits of matter are interfering with each other, and they're bouncing off of each other, and they're creating this interference pattern. So what they do is they take an electron voltmeter, a single electron fired at one time, and they fire it at these two slits. And more curiously, they still get an interference pattern. So that defies logic, because what's it interfering with? It's only one piece of small matter going through these two slits, right? And it's either going through one slit or the other slit, or it's bouncing off of the plate. But they get an interference pattern, so what could it possibly be interfering with? Well, the answer is a little bit complicated, but the answer is that the electron, at the quantum scale, at this very small scale, is not really a solid piece of matter. It's a wave of potential energy. That's all it is. It has the potential to be something, to be solid. But it leaves, and since there is no observation at the slits, no consciousness there to determine what it is, it keeps its form as a wave, or a waveform, until it strikes a measuring device, in which case then it has to say, I'm a solid object. Okay? So it takes the form of a wave. They do this over a period of time, firing one slits, and it still makes an interference pattern after a couple of hours. Okay? So they put a measuring device at one of the slits, okay, to see which slit it goes through. They're going to measure the slits, find out which one did it go through or did it bounce off, and amazingly, what happens is they get a different result. It then forms the slit pattern, the two-slit pattern, this two-line pattern, like it did when it was solid matter, when you were firing solid BBs through. Okay? And it does that because consciousness made the waveform collapse and become a solid object at that point when it is being observed. So the consciousness had everything. When consciousness is introduced at that time in the experiment, that's when it makes a decision about what it's going to be. See, so this is about how our consciousness actually influences the things that we experience. We are creating our experiences through how we view things in the world. This experiment is known as the observer effect, if you want to look it up. And there's a video of it on YouTube and Google Video. You type in the quantum double slit experiment. The key thing to understand here is that this experiment explains to us that consciousness and matter are connected, and they're connected at a fundamental level. And it's all about how we view things. The observer can create a separate reality depending on how they observe the physical world. That's what this is about. When scientists began to understand that experiment, they really wrestled with its implications. Some of them were very against these experiments that they saw with their own eyes, because they were so logically minded, so left-brained. You know, they wanted to reject it, even though they were able to repeatedly demonstrate it over and over again. The ones who really did come online and understand that this was about consciousness, a lot of them started going to taking trips and sabbaticals out to the east and going studying under Indian teachers and Hindu teachers, and started to really explore dimensions of consciousness more. The next barrier to self-realization is ego identification. And most people think of ego as, well, I think I'm better than everybody else, or I'm a hot shot, and I'm a big shot. That's not really what I'm talking about when I talk about ego. What I'm talking about is roles that we identify with. Okay? That's what ego really is. Ego is stepping into a role and identifying with the role as who we really are. When in fact, who we really are changes forms constantly. It's always present, but it takes on roles to have experiences in those roles. When we get wrapped up in the role itself, we become ego identified. Okay? So this happens with, people in their jobs, in their family life. as citizens of a certain country or region of the world, in certain service-type roles, even in families.
Eagles fans.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
an Eagles fan.
Right. So we are not the roles that we play. We are infinite consciousness expressing ourselves here, and we take on a role. But to get wrapped up and identified with it means that we're clinging on to something that is ephemeral. It is non-lasting. It's not what we really are. The next barrier to the identification, to the barriers, the next barrier to self-realization, to the realization of the true self, is the left brain prison. So, sadly, this is what our children are really being indoctrinated into in Western culture. The idea that the right brain aspect of ourselves can largely be ignored. Okay? That holistic thinking, nurturing thinking, creativity, art, music, things like that, these are being downplayed in our current Western model for education. And it's largely being based on outcome-based education about fitting into the rest of society, fitting into all the types of conditioning that we see in the Western world. And this is done through the concentration on reading, verbal, okay, math, science, reading, writing, arithmetic, right? Our Western scientific culture still is clinging largely onto old science paradigms, left brain thinking. This is, completely separate with a notion that consciousness is connected with everything. There's a new science out that incorporates the right aspect of the brain and incorporates holistic thinking and values the connection of consciousness in science. And this is known by many scientists today as the new science. Okay? And quantum mechanics is emerging as a leading candidate, amongst others. There's a new biology. Okay? Look into some of the works of John Hagelin or Bruce Lipton are some great examples, or Greg Braden, to name a few. And when we take this left brain approach, we're cutting ourselves off. We're becoming a half person. We're cutting ourselves off from another part of us that really makes us truly human. We stay in this prison, this is what a political cartoonist is kind of drawing it up as. The left brain, alone, everybody's in a cubicle, no individuality, all focused on work, on the material world. The right brain, they're connected. The people have forged a connection, an emotional and spiritual connection with each other. They're out experiencing life, okay? And there's joy present. And then, you stay in this left brain prisonhood, and I'm going to talk about why this happens physiologically, but people become controllers. They want to control things. Greed, control. It's very much brought about by chronically engaging in left brain thought with no balance of the right brain hemisphere. The next barrier to self-realization is staying identified with institutionalized belief systems. It's very important that's exactly, I'm saying exactly what they are. They are institutional and they are based in belief, not natural law, not actual understanding of truth, but simply belief systems. These are things that if they were introduced today, without anyone having ever heard of these things, then more likely than not, they would be rejected out of hand by people if they had never heard of them before. They're propagated down through the generations through conditioning and indoctrination. That's what these institutionalized belief systems are. They're not really thought about why we engage in these systems by the people who are engaging in them, because they've just taken it on the word of others that this is how it is, this is how it's always been, this is how it will always be. And as such, they don't really strive to change many of them. And these reach into all of the areas of our life, from medicine to education to politics to government to law, etc., religion. So they're multifaceted. But one of the interesting things that I find, I brought this up with many people, Art in particular is one of them, we have a shared fascination with language. Why do we use the same phrase, committed to an institution, for being committed to an institution? Isn't that interesting? When we say, I'm committed to an institution. Yes, I believe in this institution. But we say the same thing when we say, I'm being committed to an institution.
I gotta be there at
An
9
interesting one to think about. Okay? So the next section is the true self versus the lower self, or the false self. So, what are the qualities of the true self? Now that we understand what the barriers are, what are we really trying to get toward the true self? And what's the opposite of that? You know, what are the expressions that we end up with if we don't make a connection with the true self? Okay? So the true self, here are the qualities of the true self that is connected with the energy of consciousness, that is united within themselves. These are the qualities that they exhibit. The true self exists in a state of dominion and non-duality. As they think, so they feel, so they act. And they cannot be divided from those things. They cannot be made to be in opposition with the self. They understand and work toward true freedom. Not this notion of what freedom is, but actual personal sovereignty. True freedom. Okay? And that ultimately is about freedom from all suffering. All right? The true self practices alchemy to bring about the true will, the divine will, the elevation of consciousness, and the expression of higher and higher states of consciousness and awareness. The true self is concerned with the alleviation of suffering for all beings. All beings. They recognize that as one suffers, all suffer. My suffering cannot be separated from your suffering, nor yours from mine. If one is suffering, all are suffering. That's what the true self has made the understanding of. The true self's worldview reflects the understanding that there is no separation between self and others. They grasp the concept of the unified field of consciousness. There is only one consciousness here. The true self does not exist in a left brain prison or in a state of ego identification. They're existing on a holistic brain function, what is called global EEG coherence in medical terms. Okay? Their left and right hemispheres are both firing on all cylinders. Okay? And they're not identified with the roles that they play in life. They understand them as such, that they are simply roles, like a suit that you put on. I love the way David Icke described it in one of his presentations. If an astronaut went to the moon and started saying, I think I'm my spacesuit, you know, the controllers down in Houston would think he had gone out of his mind. Hey, he thinks he's a spacesuit. You know, this is just a role, you know, that we put on. So the true self does not become identified with the roles that they play. And the true self seeks to break down all institutionalized belief systems. All institutionalized belief systems. Because they have recognized that they are all limited boxes for consciousness, placed here to do one thing: control and enslave us. That's it. That's the qualities of the true self. The false self, the lower self, the egoic self, the one who is trapped in illusion. These are the qualities that you might see in an individual like this. They exist in a state of confusion and opposition. They don't really understand why they feel the way they feel, why they do the things they do. They're very confused individuals. They're in opposition. They can be made to take orders or take actions that they may know to be morally wrong, okay? Or do things against people, you know, that haven't really done anything to them. And, you know, they might say, I have this belief, but I'm going to do this thing anyway because I make money by doing it. It's my job. Okay? I'm not, it's not as I think, so I feel, so I act. I'm torn from within, divided, in opposition. The true self cannot even envision the concept, the conceptual notion of true freedom. It's like an alien, foreign concept to them, let alone act it out into the world and help bring it into expression. You know, they're only seeking control for their own benefit. It's only about me and how I can benefit from the situation. The true self employs the art of sorcery to bring about accordance with his own egoic will, his or her own. Again, this is not masculine or feminine. Everybody has some of these aspects within them. Right? So you're trying to serve your own will. It isn't about the whole consciousness that's here. It isn't about the least among us who are suffering. It is only about my comfort. That's the identification with the false self. The false self is concerned only with one's own self and one's own. If that. You know, my friends, my family, if that. The false self, their worldview reflects a belief. Again, I'm choosing this language deliberately. It's not an understanding of the worldview of the true self. It reflects an understanding. They understand that which is true. The false self is attached to a belief that things exist in a state of separation. This is simply untrue. They only believe that because they have not come to understand what the truth is, that there is no separation. The false self lives life in a state of left-brain prisonhood and in a state of ego identification, totally attached to the roles they play. How many do we know like this? The false self accepts and reinforces most institutionalized belief systems, not so much because he so morally believes with what they're really putting forward, but more because he or she is in some way benefiting personally and egoically from those institutions being in place. It doesn't matter whether they're really enslaving or keeping others totally under control that doesn't really benefit who we all are as a species. If it benefits me, I'm going to do it. That's what the egoic self, that's how the egoic self thinks, and that's the illusion that it's trapped and wrapped up in. So everything that we've talked about so far is all about the knowledge of good and evil. That's what this is really about. This is about the understanding of what's right and what's wrong. You know, that's all it really comes down to. Is there really a moral way of being in the world? Okay? Or is there moral relativism? It doesn't make a difference how we think, feel, and act. It's all relative. And it's all just, I can make it up as I go along. I'm the arbiter of truth. Okay? Or is there really a nature of good and a nature of evil? And do they manifest in our experience based on how we think, feel, and act? I would say definitely that is the case. So good manifests through the emotional polarity of love, evil through the emotional polarity of fear. And this is how they work in the world. Love brings about internal dominion so that we can give birth to external freedom. It works through magic to bring about the true will of higher expressions of consciousness through the vehicle of alchemy to create non-dualism, a being that is united with their own consciousness in their thoughts, emotions, and actions. Evil works through fear to create confusion within us so that control, ever increasing and centralized control, can be brought into the world. Okay? And it's working through the art of sorcery, mental manipulation, or if you like, mind control, okay, to bring about the egoic will of the sorcerer only, okay, through the art of illusion and manipulation, and its goal is to create opposition, not just in the external world, but more importantly, create a being that's divided from within themselves. Love puts us in the proper direction. It helps us to understand that we are one It helps us to realize the true self. It helps us toward higher states of awareness, toward the understanding that we are an expression of consciousness that is existing on multiple levels, on higher dimensional planes. We're a multi-dimensional being, not just this physical one. We're so identified with the physical, we don't understand that there's a whole expression of other dimensions that exist within us, within our psyche. And the love energy helps us to create a balanced brain. Physiologically, a balanced brain is how this state of awareness makes its way into our consciousness. It is about brain health. I'm going to talk about right after this what happens when the halves of the brain become imbalanced significantly to each direction. That's critical to understand, because most people exist in one of those states, one of those completely imbalanced hemispherical states. Evil's working through fear to create misdirection in our lives. It wants to cut us off from our emotions so we have no moral compass for direction in life. It wants to get us to see ourselves completely as separate, a poisonous worldview, so that we identify with the lower self, with the roles that we play, ego identification. So that we're trapped in the five-sense illusion and we believe just the physical decoding mechanism, or what our five senses can decode, is all that exists, and it wants to keep us largely in a left brain prison. There's a right brain prison too, but it's much rarer. But the left brain is the favored method for the sorcerers. So we look at the model of consciousness, the threefold law once again, and we just see if our thoughts are tended toward love, if they are about higher consciousness. Love is the energy that helps consciousness to expand. It's the expansive force. It opens consciousness up. Then our emotions within will be in balance, in harmony with truth, in dominion. Okay? And then our actions will be geared toward working toward true freedom. And that is the pyramid that brings everything that is good, that we call in our experience good, into the world. That's what it's moving to. It's trying to build toward love, and it is based on internal dominion and external freedom. And that's the only way. You use these two things as a base, it's the only way you're ever going to build toward that. Conversely, if our thoughts have a negative worldview attached with them, and they're totally fearful, our emotions internally are going to be completely out of order. We're going to be confused. We're not going to understand our surroundings. This is the state of unconsciousness. Okay? And then our actions will be geared toward control. We will want to take control of others. If you're not in control of yourself, how are you going to take control of other people? You know? And this is about ownership of self. That's what sovereignty and freedom is really about. You own your own house, and no one can tear it apart. No one can make you do something that you know to be wrong, or you hold against your beliefs and your higher judgment. Okay? So that's the pyramid of fear. It brings about into the world everything that we call in our experiences evil. And that's what it's based on. It's trying to build a world of perpetual fear, and it's based in confusion within and the attempt to control others without. These are illusions. They don't exist in manifest reality. You know, just like the illusion of hot and cold, of light and dark, there's only love. And these things are all illusion that we have come to identify with and give life to as something that's real. So, we saw the model of consciousness as having an expression in the left and right brain as the yang and yin energies. The left hemisphere of the brain as the masculine part, and the right hemisphere as the feminine part. Okay? So, what happens to the consciousness when one of these two hemispheres totally begins to dominate the other? Okay? It's very interesting, and it explains a lot about what's happening in the world. We saw that there are three parts of the brain. There's the neocortex. That's what you're looking at here. If you're looking at the neocortex, there's the front of the head. So you're looking at it from the top. Okay, that's the left hemisphere, that's the right hemisphere. That's the higher brain, the human brain. In the middle, you have the limbic brain, the mammal brain, responsible for our emotions. And then at the base, of the brain, the top of the spinal column, is the R complex, the brain stem and the cerebellum, responsible for survival mechanisms. All right, and lower thinking, base consciousness. Well, look at the neocortex as the CEO of Brain Incorporated, let's say. Okay, the neocortex is the executive commander of the human brain complex. He is the boss of the building, the boss of the temple. Okay? Now, if the CEO of a company gets ill, one of his middle managers have to step in to take over. So you have two choices. You have the limbic brain and you have the R complex. Depending upon the nature of brain imbalance, an electrochemical brain imbalance, depending on how we think, how we respond to the situations that we've, grown up in, that we've encountered in a day-to-day basis, thinking can become imbalanced toward one brain hemisphere or another chronically. And this is reflected physiologically. It's measurable. Brain scans can show this. I'm going to show you pictures of some. All right? If the left brain is the favored part of the brain, and we live perpetually in the left brain state, one part of the whole neocortex, the whole CEO of the brain, starts to shut down and not really function as the executive commander of the whole brain system. And then the executive control gets shunted to the R complex, the base brain. And this makes sense based on what we've already understood about how the polar energies of the brain work. This is the left brain, analytical, logical, male, solar, right? If this part of the brain gets chronically imbalanced, right, then you're going to become a male dominator. And it doesn't mean just male, masculine dominator. Females can fall into that condition as well. Okay? You're going to become obsessed with control. All right? External control over others, bossiness, greed, hoarding, things like that. These are the behaviors that are going to come out when you're chronically imbalanced toward the left brain hemisphere. The limbic system, the emotional brain, is going to largely be shut down, and then the R complex takes over. All right? When the right hemisphere becomes chronically imbalanced, okay? So the right hemisphere now, this is a rarer condition. All right? It's not as favored for manipulative purposes, shall we say. All right? But if you become chronically imbalanced toward the right brain hemisphere, the exact opposite happens. The reptile brain largely becomes shut down. The neocortex, again, is not functioning as the executive controller of the whole brain as it should. See, because we should be using all three of those. We need this to live in the physical world. We need the R complex to live in the physical world. We need this to have a moral, the midbrain, the mammal brain, the limbic system, to have a moral compass for our direction in life. And we need this to have higher order thinking, to understand conceptual ideas. Well, if the left brain is favored, this part of the brain takes over, the R complex. If the right brain is favored, then this part of the brain starts to shut down with the neocortex, and the mammal brain gets favored. And that's why a right brain person is on emotional overload. Okay? This part of the brain has really kind of taken over the whole house. And that person becomes one who is at the mercy of their own emotions. The left brain imbalanced individual becomes a controller. So when a person becomes a controller, right, they're trying to dominate others. This is male domination. When they become completely at the mercy of their own emotions, they become like a slave. So brain imbalance is creating, toward the left, it creates a controller or a master or a dominator. Toward the right, you start to become more docile and passive and accepting of control. So we see that this is done in both directions in life, and it explains a lot about the state of the world. If you really think about it, most people are in one of these two states of chronic brain imbalance, and it exists on all different levels. You know, a controller can be controlling to those beneath him and then very right-brained and subordinate to those above him. It's a hierarchical system. Now, this is not just theory. This is expressed in the physiology of the brain, and it's totally provable. This is a PET scan, P-E-T. It's an older type of brain scan. There's now much more advanced ones that I don't have pictures of right now in my presentation, but you can go online and find SPECT scans, S-P-E-C-T, and look at mappings of the whole neocortex in 3 dimensions. They now have 3D SPECT scanning capability. They're absolutely incredible imaging technologies. And this is an older form of a brain scan called a PET brain scan. What you're looking at is electrochemical activity. This is neural connections within the brain. So the lighter areas, the color areas, are areas of more neural firing and connectivity. These areas that are connected. These areas that you look at and they look like they have holes, okay? The black areas, the dark areas, are not holes in the brain matter, in the gray matter of the brain, okay? These are areas of electrochemical deadness in the brain. The brain is not firing in these regions, okay? So it's electrically deadened in those regions. Now, another thing to understand is the perspective we're looking at the brain from here. You have to understand that we're looking at the underneath side of the brain. Okay? So, if you were to lift the brain up like this, you were to just take the brain like this and lift it up, that's the perspective you're looking at it from underneath, which makes this the top part of the brain, okay? And what you're seeing on your right is actually the left brain hemisphere, and then that's the right, because you got to remember you're seeing it from underneath and not over top. So keep that in mind, all right? You can't see it on this slide. I took this from a science website. But this brain was labeled normal. My resolution isn't so great in this slide. And this one is violent. Okay? This person did not have a traditional Western educational upbringing. They did not eat a Western-style diet. They watched very little to any television on a daily basis. They read books on a constant basis, and they engaged in small amounts of meditation daily. The brain on the left there, okay? And it exhibits what's called global EEG coherence. This is a balanced brain chemistry on both sides of the brain, left and right. This brain was taken from an individual who spent some time in a prison system, who grew up in an inner city environment with a conventional Western education, ate a largely fast food and junk food diet, watched many hours of television daily, never engaged in continual reading of any kind, of any higher order thought, in books, and never meditated in their life. And you can see that physically, the neural connections in the brain are devastated, okay, on both sides, not just one, but particularly the brain half that is significantly damaged is the right hemisphere. More of the damage is in the right hemisphere of the brain. This is the part that's completely shut down, because this person was a left brain imbalance dominator type, and it led him to prison time, okay, among probably other things. But they labeled that brain scan the violent brain, which I thought was extremely appropriate. Okay? So this is stuff that is rooted in science for those of us who are more left brain, want something hard to back it up. The data is there. Go online, look at SPECT scans, look at PET scans, and they can show you how the brain becomes chronically imbalanced, and it is depending on how we think, the types of food we put into our body, the types of information we take in. We are inwardly formed by the information we take in. Okay? So I'm going to wrap it up pretty much. What this is all ultimately about is consciousness. It's the Trinity that exists within us. It's the mind, the spirit, the body. It's the Father, the Mother, and the child. And what is really going on is there's one particular aspect of this that's really under attack. And I don't even think I need to tell you what it is. Of course, it is the Spirit. It's the sacred feminine. It's the Holy Spirit. Okay? Aspect of our consciousness is under attack because it's our emotions that really guide our moral direction in life. And that's the thing that is most significantly under attack. Now, I say under attack because the attack on this level of consciousness is actually a directed, concerted effort. And it's a concerted effort to make the world into a total male-dominator world, into a yang-only expression of consciousness that ignores the yin aspect or the feminine aspect of ourselves. And it's largely succeeding. It's largely succeeding. Okay? And we have little time to turn it around. And in the next part, I'm going to talk about how the sorcerers of consciousness are accomplishing this. And for them, thus far, it's been like shooting fish in a barrel, because we know very little about these concepts. We're very unarmed, so to speak, when it comes to knowledge of self. And that's what we need to get our way out of the mess that we're in. And a brilliant artist, a brilliant spiritual artist that many may have heard of. This is my last slide for tonight, and then I'll take some questions. His name is Alex Gray. He's from New York. Barb and I got a chance to visit him at his old studio, which I believe is now wrapped up, and he's moving farther upstate. But the paintings that this guy paints are just absolutely phenomenal. He's using his talent in such an extraordinary way. And this is my favorite painting by Alex Gray. It just resonated with me from the very first second I saw it. It's called Gaia, the name of Earth, you know, the name that's been traditionally given to Mother Earth. And I think it brilliantly depicts the imbalance that we're experiencing in consciousness right now. If we place ourselves as the world tree in this painting, our left hemisphere, if it has gone completely haywire, the world is aflame. You know, it's a depiction of hell. The beings are burning, the life is burning, there's smog and pollution in the atmosphere, there are rivers of blood and tears, and there's nothing but technology in the sky. Okay? And that's what happens if we stay in this left brain prisonhood. And conversely, when we make a connection with the spiritual, nurturing, sacred, feminine, right brain aspect of ourselves, then we can see a world like that come into fruition and into existence. So that's where I'm going to wrap it up here for tonight. The next part we'll get into significantly darker material, just preparing everybody for that. Okay, and I'm going to look at the multifaceted methods that mind control is used against us in society. And it's very real. It's actively being waged upon us, and it's an effort to completely shut down consciousness here. I'm going to talk about the physical, the actual tangible aspects of mind control, and I'm going to do an analysis of all the multifaceted methods by which it is wielded against us. All right, that'll be part 2. Thank you, and I'll take your questions now. Thanks a lot, Dr. Great audience. Thank you. Yes.
Just a little observation about the word play.
Yes.
It's not play.
Sure.
There's the word thought, and if you break it up, it's thou, gut. But the country in the West is America.
I'm sorry. No. Before everybody leaves, I just want to make one other announcement. There is a flyer here for next month, right up here as you leave. Sign the mailing list if you want, and you can get free files when I send out pod mailings. And just pick up one of the flyers for next month. They're right on this table here, okay? Continue, sir.